All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I am beyond humbled and thrilled to be talking with Diana Larson today. I'll spend about 2 minutes giving you the history of the Stride Speaker Series, and then I'll turn the floor over to Diana. So my name is Debbie Madden. I'm the founder and CEO of Stride Consulting. We're an Agile software development consultancy, and for those that don't know us, the thing that we pride ourselves on is really high iterative, high collaborative, non-dogmatic, Agile best practice, whether that means we join your team and code alongside you, or we model the way in product and engineering best practice. And, in March when COVID hit, we said, what can we do as the world is moving fully distributed to bring some of the best practices in running teams, whether it be Agile or outside of the Agile ecosystem, to those that we know like you. And so we put together this speaker series, and we're almost done with it, actually. So this is speaker 9 of 10, and the 10th one will be Jeff Gothelf in August. And today we are so lucky and thankful to have Diana Larson join us. Diana is talking to us today about how limits empower agility. I think that's so important. And Agile's been around for a long time now, but this idea of setting limits is a key piece of it. And so Diana, not only is she a speaker and a presenter giving keynotes worldwide, but she is author of some of my favorite books, Lift Off, which is like one of my Bibles, co-author of Agile Retrospectives with Esther Derby, who talked last week with us. And she is also the co-creator of the Agile Fluency model with James Shore, which is an outstanding model for that I would advocate all teams to really take a look at. She'll be sharing her contact information at the end for those of you that want to reach her. And so throughout this talk, if you have questions, feel free to enter them in the chat. Diana's going to share some knowledge and best practices with us. And then at the end, we can have sort of a back and forth Q&A. So with that, Diana, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Debbie. I'm going to share my screen here and get us started. So yeah, I am so happy to be here today. And for all of you who've joined us, I hope you've enjoyed the Stride series so far. I'm really honored to have been invited to be included in this group of speakers. I think the theme leading through adversity is so incredibly timely, and I hope we're providing useful concepts and learning for you. Today, we're going to talk about a specific aspect of Agile and agility in teams, limits, investments, and trade-offs. Along the way, I'm going to ask you to join in. So please have your phone nearby so you can participate in the polls. We've got a few Menti polls along the way, and also have writing materials handy so you can take notes about the things you'd like to discuss further at the end, and to remind yourself later about thoughts about your own work and things that occur to you along the way. So let's see. Why are you not there? Oh, okay, it's not going to work with my mouse. There's always some kind of technical glitch in these online things. I hope that's, fingers crossed, that's the last one. So we're going to be talking about teams, limits, investments, and those things. I want to give you another, whoops, let's see, we'll go down here. I'll just so that you know, in case you're madly wanting to tweet during this or something, there's our the Twitter handles, mine and the Agile Fluency projects, and some ways to get in touch with us, and then we'll come back to that at the end. This is the title of this talk is kind of an interesting conglomeration, and so I want to go into it a little bit. How is just the way we do things, the way in which we approach things. Limits, boundaries, restrictions, constraints, tethers, even expectations, when those expectations are clear, can provide some effective limits. Empowering, help to make capable, make things possible, give permissions. This is about you and your context, and so I hope you really take that in. And then Agile and agility includes qualities like exhibiting quick, well-coordinated, easy, graceful, adaptable, or, you know, for many of us, deriving from the manifesto for Agile software development. So in this talk, we're going to, oops, I'll go back. Let me go back one. So in this talk, we're going to be, you know, using the Agile Fluency model as a kind of an applicable scaffolding. And we're going to be thinking about limits. And so the first thing I want to do is I'm going to stop sharing this and start sharing. Oops, and start sharing. This sharing thing always gets me. And start sharing this. So go to menti.com and use the code 533992. And if somebody would be willing to drop that into the chat for me, that would be very grateful. So you know, I'm curious about the ideas that you have about limits that you are bringing to this talk. And we can create a word cloud as you submit. Let's see if this works. It's always fun to see. Is this going to work or is this not going to work? Hey, yeah. Blue and pink. That's interesting that they're starting there. Yeah. Project boundaries, absolutely. Task switching. Yeah, that kind of sometimes goes across limits. Time zones, oh gosh, now that we're working in remote teams, time zones are a very interesting limitation to what we can accomplish together, and tells us some things about what we need. But time, yeah. So sprint boundaries, all those kinds of things. Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right, so I'm gonna, so that's an interesting collection of things, and we'll be talking about actually quite a number of the things that show up here. So I'm gonna go back over here and share the slides. So my mom, this is, you know, when I think about agility, I think about what Peter Drucker called knowledge work, where, you know, where he really talked about how knowledge workers need to have more flexibility, they need to have more access, and I think for most software teams, this has actually morphed into learning work. And that this talk is about the way that creative learning work, just like with the creative arts, is enabled by limitations. So yeah, let me tell you my story about my mom. My mom spent many years as an artist, both teaching artistic processes and creating her own work. She's still doing this even into her 90s. And her house is a gallery of her work. And like anyone who is related to an artist to some extent, so is mine house, a gallery of her work. And I've heard variation on the theme of these quotes about limits and limitations and art and creativity all my life. And I've found these to be true in my own work. My work as a coach and consultant is also learning work and creative work. And I find that if I understand, like, what are the expectations for success in my engagement with an organization, or, you know, who can I talk to in the organization and who can't I talk to in the organization, those all give me an idea about the best way to do my work. back. So for this, we're going to use the Agile Fluency model as a scaffolding. So I also need to know how much you know about the model. So we're going to go back over to Menti and go to the next slide. And can I just click on this and it'll go to the next slide? No, I have to go back over here. And let's do the next slide. Isn't that one? So how familiar are you with the Agile Fluency? Did I not share it yet? I didn't share it yet. There's no green bar. Oh, so fun. All right. There we go. So how familiar are you with the Agile Fluency model? Yeah, we're using the same code. So most of you, good. So most of you have some familiarity. There's only a few of you that don't know anything about it at all. So I'll give enough background to make sure that you're not left sort of dangling. But I also I'm not going to go too much into detail because it looks like a lot of folks here are pretty familiar. So at least have some. And I'm glad to see we've got several licensed facilitators. Thank you for showing up. It's always good to see your faces as well. So back to the presentation. All right. All right. So, all right, there we go. Now we're back on track. So you've helped me know how much detail to go into, and if you're unfamiliar with the model, I invite you to follow the talk with a visit to the 10-minute video at agilefluency.org on our homepage. It's pretty short and sweet, and it'll give you the general overview of the model, and you can make your own choice about if you want to dig any deeper. In short, the idea is that before choosing to adopt an Agile approach or becoming aware of the need for greater agility, most orgs are working in what we call pre-Agile. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're ever going to need to move away from that, but the kind of qualities of that are the organization has its workers, specifically their software development professionals, arranged in work groups of individual contributors who are assigned tasks, individual tasks to take care of, generally according to an area of specialization and directly coordinated by a manager according to the predetermined plan. It's fine for some kinds of work. But some organizations realize this isn't getting them the outcomes or productivity that they need. So they decide to shift to a more agile way of working. And often the first shift they choose, as we look around, coming around this corner, is to target is team fluency in the focusing zone. So let's talk. I've got a story to share with you about that. This is a smart meter. And a number of years ago, I worked with a large public utility that was undergoing a shift to smart metering, which is automating the work of individual meter readers that go from house to house. The meters, communicate directly with the utility. This effort had a lot of moving parts, as you can imagine. It was a multi-year project and impacted many departments and functions. And IT's role in developing the software was way behind schedule. With 18 months to go live with the meters and taking a very traditional project management pre-Agile approach, the software was months and months delayed. The CIO, as luck would have it, the CIO and the new director of application development both had backgrounds in Lean from a previous company, and they thought, they learned that Agile and Lean had some similarities, and so they decided to give it a try. And that's when I got a call to join this initiative. Instead of having the work spread across the whole IT department, we assigned 5 teams made up of folks who had the right skills and background to really focus exclusively on the metering project. They instituted basic Scrum, simple cross-functional teams, basic Agile communication and collaboration techniques, just for those 5 teams. And not only did those teams make up the delay, they finished their work first. They had their deliverables ready before anybody else in the smart metering project. It was so successful that senior leaders decided to shift all 17 of the IT teams to a new structure that enabled an agile approach to work for everyone and all the projects and products that they were working on. Nothing fancy, just basic focusing fluency, which is not trivial, but it's the first zone in the model. And it's because the team's ability to focus on the organization's highest priorities and communicate with stakeholders had proved so valuable to them. They wanted everyone to be using it. So we talked with leaders about the benefits of the Agile fundamentals in the focusing zone. We showed how they could reduce the cost of delay by focusing on the most valuable thing first. They reduced waste due to building the wrong thing and were able to redirect the teams as they got feedback that told them they needed to do that. The teams improved communication within the team and with stakeholders, and they maintained sort of a whole team focus on where are we trying to go and what is the outcome we're trying to get here. And the teams learned to think and plan their work to produce the benefits that everyone needed to see. Back. So effectively making a shift to focusing teams also means focusing or limiting. A focus is a limit, right? Focusing the investments in enabling the team's work. Scattershot training or overloading expectations just doesn't work. Management by moving people around, and I hear about that much too often, just doesn't work. Specific targeted investments, keeping everyone's eyes on the prize, that's what works. And that's where we want to do. Keep our things moving along. Why is this always doing 2? Right, okay. So other limits that can help teams achieve, wait a minute, I'm way back. There we go. Helpful limits that work with focusing teams are, include these kinds of things. So, and some of these things showed up in the word cloud that we created to begin with. So WIP limits and clear working agreements and team assignments, even limits like sizing the work. And you can probably think of others. So what limits have helped you when teams are new to Agile? Write a note in the chat and let us know when you're working with a team that's first encountering Agile and needs to develop some of these focusing fluencies, what kind of limits have helped them? Yeah, and WIP limits are extremely helpful. The reason that Scrum started out with the sprints is that the time boxes, those closer deadlines can help people, or almost deadlines. Purpose is a limit. We're not doing everything. We're just focusing on this one purpose. Yeah, all of those things. Those are great. Yeah. So clarity. Clarity gives us really useful limits to the things that we need to be working on. Helps us to avoid wishful thinking, keeps us focused on the relevant information, and we really want to concentrate on the investment options and trade-offs. So moving on to the next shift in the model, focusing teams can be entirely adequate for business needs. As in the smart meter example, they maintained that new team structure for a long time. And there are business leaders who need additional capabilities to reach the outcomes they need, their goals. They also need their teams to reliably deliver low defect software frequently, and that's where the delivering zone comes in. Fluent delivering teams have the agile engineering skills needed to produce quality code and release at will. And these benefits can't be overstated if your business model depends on them. Consider reducing QA time, reducing the time spent on fixing defects, reducing the cost of deployment, the value of increased morale, and decreasing employee churn. All these benefits can be quantified. We regularly see 20% or more reductions in waste and similar reductions in lead time from teams that are approaching delivering fluency. This adds hundreds of thousands of dollars of value for each team. These benefits cannot be achieved without clarifying the investment boundaries and trade-offs. My finger must just hit too hard. I don't know what's going on here. So the investments that we need for delivering, are also substantial. It takes time for a team to learn the skills needed and pay down technical debt. Even though learning curves can be expensive, they may well be worth it. In a company where the next deadline is always the most important thing, the initial investment is deciding later acceleration promised by greater skill will be worth the time that we make for practice and that expense. That's why leaders have to make this a conscious choice. They may also need to invest in skilled Agile practitioners to mentor their teams, not like just assigning any random former project manager that I've seen too many times. We find that companies often discover the value of the delivering zone after they've spent time in the focusing zone or had other experience with Agile that didn't really quite get them the results they needed. They think they've failed at Agile, but in fact, they just hadn't targeted the right zone yet. That's okay. It's better to learn from their experience and choose the improvements that they need. So what are the limits that we need here? Specific limits that can help teams achieve skillful proficiency in delivering include working according to team coding standards instead of individual preference, abiding by effective agreements for meetings, reducing the backlog visibility to optimize cognitive load on the team, and other limits like those. Lori Apple, a colleague in Berlin, told me about that in her organization after COVID hit. She shared actually several ways that they had decided to put in limits to support their teams. But one, for example, was to stay productive in a changing environment. Her company limited the number of initiatives they would work on. They had a workload of 25 simultaneous product efforts, and they pared that down to just 3 that they knew were going to be the most important to accomplish first, delivering those sooner and then dipping into that body of the other 22 product possibilities later on. So they set strict priorities, limits. Take a minute to notice limits just in your own, you can put it in the chat or in your own notes, that you might have noticed or considered on your teams that might apply more in the delivering zone. Test first. Oh, TDD. Yes. Interesting kind of limit, right? The question above about scaling, start a scaling investment. I'm kind of outside the norm of thinking about these things. I think what you need to do is learn to do Agile well in just a few teams and make sure you know what that looks like and how to do that before you start scaling it out to lots and lots of teams. I think that's I like, it's like prototyping your team or prototyping your work approach. Make sure you've got it right before you start spreading it out to other people. Pairing mob programming is a really interesting way to think about a limit, and one that I think is really useful. So let's move on. So for a lot of folks, our most frequent request of all the people that we talk to and all of our licensed facilitators, we all see, for most organizations, the most frequent request is for teams that are fluent in focusing or delivering. However, a few leaders guide businesses that require more innovation and more potential for market disruption to meet their product development goals, more than is reliably produced by delivering zone teams. So then we look at shift into the optimizing zone. It's the promise of Agile teams. It's the way we originally have thought about Agile, and the why a lot of folks think they have failed at Agile, because they're not reaching this optimizing zone qualities here. And part of that's because it requires a shift in structure in the organization, which almost never happens. But the optimizing zone is teams that respond to changing market needs by collaborating with their customers to make market-leading decisions, artfully interacting to build working software through customer collaboration, and responding flexibly to changing needs. So the business value here, is considerable. The opportunities depend on the customer and may include improved competitiveness, reduced communication delay, waste, better alignment with market needs. At one company that my colleague James Shore talked to, the chief product owner said that this zone would allow them to better meet the needs of their market, and he believed that move would increase sales by 10%. It would also address their most common cause of developer dissatisfaction, which was confusion. Those missed expectations about how their work related to company goals. And that would reduce employee churn by 10%. These were the estimates that the chief product owner gave us, not our estimates. Since this is a company with hundreds of millions of dollars in annual sales, 10% is worth several $1,000,000 a year. It was definitely worth his while to pause to examine the options, investments, and trade-offs that would make this possible. And they are significant. Significant benefits involve significant investments. If it was easy, everyone would be doing it already. The optimizing zone requires an investment in organizational structure. You have to move business expertise and decision-making into the teams. You move those decisions closest to where people are doing the work. And that requires a real effort of political will. Management structure may need to shift. Organization assumptions are challenged. Promotional paths may alter. We find that many companies aren't even aware that this zone is a possibility. But when we talk to senior leaders, they are intrigued and delighted. They think that this could bring them all kinds of benefits. Middle managers tend to find this zone disruptive or even threatening because of the structure changes it requires. You can find more about this in the downloadable ebook. So, specific limits that can help teams achieve skillful proficiency in optimizing include making clear budgetary and funding expectations, then defining the specific cross-functional skills that are required by the product developers, that are required by the product the team is working on. Product developers need to limit metrics to those very few that will prove most useful to the business. And we need to limit the team decision authority boundaries. So those are all things that, really help a team get their work done. So what are your thoughts? would your organization rise to the challenges of limits and trade-offs and investments to gain the benefits of optimizing teams? Or would focusing or delivering teams be a better fit? So we're going to shift over to our Menti again. And where are you, Menti? There we go. And we're going to go back here. And this is going to have a new Menti number. So we're going to do this. So the code for this one, it's still menti.com, and the code is 77568. And the question is, in terms of outcomes and investment trade-offs, for most teams I work with, the which zone is best fit for purpose? Oh, good. We're starting out even here. This is fun. You know, it's interesting. Some folks do choose to say, you know what, we're just going to stick with the old way we're doing it because we can't make these trade-offs. We can't make these investments. And so, but I think that's a benefit too, because it helps people decide, manage their own expectations about whether Agile is even the right thing for them. If you can't invest in making those improvements, then, you know, going to an Agile approach is just going to be frustrating for everyone involved and probably not that helpful. And I think that's why we end up hearing a lot about, you know, where Agile isn't working or where people aren't getting their benefits. It's because they haven't thought about the trade-offs between outcomes and investments. They just want what they want when they want it, and they don't think about what they may have to give to get that. So it looks like we've got a pretty even split so far in what people want here. So I'm going to go on and go back to the slides. All right, slide share that one. All right. So a surprising thing about the model as a whole is that it's faster and more effective to choose the right zone for you right at the beginning and then go all in. The way this model is constructed, any of these zones might be the place for you to start. So you don't want to go further on this path than what is going to be beneficial to you, but you will need everything up to that point to get the zone you want. So you might limit investments to those options that build focusing zone fluency rather than buying a whole prepackaged Agile transformation. Good news, you can change your mind too. The proficiencies are mutually supportive. So a team that's concurrently working on learning focusing and delivering skills will gain focusing faster and get to delivering faster. We find the Agile Fluency model is a great way to focus your conversations with leaders only on what they need, keeping their constraints in mind while exploring that benefit investment trade-off, those limits. Combined with a spirit of honest discovery, we found this to be a very effective way forward. If you'd like a copy of this graphic, if I was doing this talk in person, I would be handing all of you little cards that have this graphic, but I can't do that anymore. So we're doing this in a different way. If you'd like a copy of this graphic and you can reproduce it, we'll send you a PDF. So contact us, go to the contact us form on our agilefluency.org and say, I'd like a copy of the model graphic, and we'll send you the PDF. So that's our alternative way to distribute that to you. So let's think about some of those trade-offs. What are some of we've been talking about benefits, investments, limits, and those trade-offs. What are some of the costs of achieving fluency? Keep in mind, fluency is unconscious competence. It's your routine way of working. It's not what you stretch into on a good day when you've got no distractions or other kind of obstacles in your way. It's what you achieve naturally, even under pressure or hard challenges. So achieving fluency in these zones requires a real effort at mastery and a variety of organizational changes as well. So to avoid nasty disappointments, it's key to consider what's going to be possible in my context, in my organization, or with the teams that I'm working with. So these are very common ones. Also, when you're thinking about trade-offs and constraints and boundaries and assumptions and so forth, remember to consider it from many perspectives. Limits can really empower your agility, and that will happen only with careful, thoughtful consideration of the potential benefits, the investments, and trade-offs. What status quo assumptions and expectations may need to shift? What payoff will make the bother and annoyance of going slow to go fast worthwhile? And teams, leadership, executives, the business as a whole, the cost-benefit ratio you can sustain, all of those perspectives are worth giving some time to think about. It's another good time to maybe take a few notes or drop a comment in the chat. In my mind, it's important to learn as much about the business and organizational systems as you can. And for me, influencing change in a large organization starts with my very first conversation with leaders. In the way of thinking about things, it's called appreciative inquiry. One of their tenets is change begins when you start asking the questions, right? So I use the Agile Fluency Model graphic and my understanding from writing the ebook to organize my questions, to kind of frame my inquiry. I really want to understand more, and that really helps. So when I talk to leaders about their goals, I also use the model to share the types of investments that are typically required. That's where that big graphic comes in handy. I can bring that with me when I visit. Doing this early frames how they perceive the opportunity present in greater agility. It helps me to discover implicit limiting assumptions as well as explicit constraints. It helps me to set appropriate expectations about options and trade-offs. After that initial conversation, I will gather data about the organizational system. We use and provide to others the Agile Fluency Diagnostic for this purpose. And some people use it as part of a workshop. Other people use it as a way of interviewing team members. You can apply it in a lot of different ways. Even if I already have a sense of what's needed, the diagnostic provides qualitative and quantitative data to back up what would otherwise be maybe just my opinion. The data reveals patterns in the organizational system. Not only does it say behavior we see in one team that is about that team, but behavior we start seeing across several or most of the teams, that's not about the team or the individuals or even the managers. That's about the system that people have unconsciously created to give them the results they're getting. It's one of my all-time favorite organizational quotes. Every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. So if you want different results, we need to look at where are the leverage points that we're going to want to change. Together with the Agile Fluency model and the diagnostic, we also look at the improvement cycle. With the data that we've gotten and the information, we can bring this back to the organization. And we talk to them about the concerns and aspirations for agility that they originally shared. We remind them of the investments required, and then we tie that back to the actual state of their system. Then they either accept our recommendations or better yet, we conduct a workshop that pulls the recommendations from them. They figure out what recommendations they want to follow. So with the stories from the qualitative data and the numbers from the diagnostic quantitative data backing up the work, we found this to be very motivating for leaders. We'll talk with them about, one company conducted the diagnostic with 50 teams. They found that 2/3 of their teams didn't have a clear, this is why I keep beating this drum, their teams did not have a clear understanding of why they were building what they were building. Product managers weren't even participating in demos or sharing the reasons for their decisions. So, you know, that the diagnostic team that did the 50 diagnostics brought the information to the senior vice presidents in the product organization. And that day, fixing that became the organization's #1 priority. In large organizations, people often balk at the investments required for success. They only see the restriction and limits. They don't see the empowering, creative boost of working within limitations. The diagnostic gives leaders the bounded context and information they need to make the case for investment. Many times we've come into organizations where we're working with an IT leader and they're saying, oh, we never get this back by finance. But when we start looking at the investments versus the potential benefits, finance gets quick to sign on because they see the ROI. So after all the leaders are on board with the investment plan, now we begin the standard Agile cycle of devising experiments and evaluating the results. Many of us already know how to do this part. For many Agile coaches and organizational leaders we talk to, the challenge is having the opportunity to make improvements in alignment with the business leader's goals. So the first half of the improvement cycle guides the opportunities in the second half. In short cycles, we iterate, we improve, and every 6 months or so down here, we may conduct the diagnostic again. So this is a good time, I think, for questions.
Yep, and Diana,
I'm going to stop sharing. Yeah, so what are some of the questions?
And I've been intently taking notes for my own self.
Yeah, yeah. Good.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Skip, I'll read it out so everyone can hear, but how have the remote workshops compared to on-site or off-site co-located? In other words, how does the AFP, Agile Fluency Project workshop adapt to virtual? Did diagnostics trend to show different variation?
Yes. So there's been a couple of things. I mean, at first people would, you know, we have a preference for co-location. And so we designed the diagnostic workshop around co-location. And so immediately as we all went into working from home, the questions came up about how are we going to do this with remote teams? And some people already had experience doing that conversion. So folks have experimented with various different tools, you know, the Miro tools, those kinds of the online whiteboards, the various kinds of things. We do have an online diagnostic that is coming very soon. But in the meantime, people are also doing things like, I was just actually talking with someone today who told me a story about using the diagnostic tool to interview each team member and then collecting all the responses from the team member and then showing that back to the team in an online way. So it took longer than the workshop would take, but it got to the same place. They could still see the patterns in their behavior. They could still talk about the differences in their responses. They just did that in an online way. So all of it's possible, and we're very excited that we're getting we're so close to an online version, but we're just not quite ready to release it yet. So some of the folks on this call will get into being some of the folks we call on to test that tool and make sure it's working the way we expect it to work. But for now, you can still use the ideas behind the diagnostic and the sets of questions or items that are in the diagnostic in other ways, and still get the outcomes that you need. We're seeing, predictably, maybe we're seeing more comments about not having the right tools than maybe we used to see, because not all teams are given all the electronic tools that they need to work effectively, which is sad. I mean, every so often I hear about teams that don't even have the capability to have video with each other, that they're doing everything over the phone. And for me, that's just heartbreaking, because how do you keep a cohesive team that way when they can't even see each other's facial expressions? But I think that'll change over time. And but that's a newer kind of result that we're seeing, of comments that come out of doing the diagnostic about the limits that they feel they're working under.
Great.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you, Dan. And I want to read one more. Brian Loudermilk has a question. So Brian, I'll just read out loud. He says, I think my organization is actually overscaled, well past the point of diminishing marginal returns from each new team. Is it reasonable to limit the number of teams, unless perhaps they're truly autonomous optimizing teams?
Well, one of the reports we've gotten back from organizations who've used the Agile Fluency model and you feel like they're getting good results is very often they will tell us they have some teams, like R&D teams, maybe they want in the optimizing zone, but they don't want most of their teams there. They want, some teams in the focusing zone, because they're focused on very short-term projects or things that lend themselves to just that skill set. And then most of their teams they want in the delivering zone. But the organization has to be prepared to support the teams that they have in every zone, right? And so that's a challenge for the whole organization. But again, bringing out using the model to kind of help me have that conversation, letting people know about the article, the downloadable ebook, and what it says about some of the expectations that you can have and what proficiencies you need, depending on what kind of product you're building. It can be really useful and kind of level setting. Okay, so we still need these teams to be here, but maybe we can, give these other teams some other help in different ways, or make sure that we're giving them help onboarding new team members, which is a question that kind of across teams that still needs to happen. Yeah.
Excellent. So I'm going to read a couple. There's two more that I see here, and then we'll kind of wrap things up. So the next one is on tricky aspects of diagnostics and maturity models, as managers tend to incorrectly use them to compare teams to each other. How does the Fluency model address this?
Well, the Fluency model is not a maturity model. That's the first thing we have to talk about. The Fluency model is more like a bus zone map. You only go to the place where you really need to do business, right? You don't always go all the way to the furthest away zone in the suburbs if what you want is to get a building permit at City Hall downtown, right? So we think about the model not as a maturity model. If there is maturity, it is within the zones, becoming a very high performing, very mature focusing team, for instance, because that's what our business needs. So that's one thing. And then the other, what was the second part of that? Oh, and managers misusing the diagnostic. We do not show team outcomes to managers. We only show aggregated outcomes to managers. And we explicitly tell them that's how it's going to be. And we tell them their job is to work on the system. So we want to give them the system view. And that we know human nature is such that if they have the information about the teams, they're going to want to go fiddle around in the teams. And that's not what needs to be happening. So this is where the sort of extreme consulting skills come in. But so far, we've been pretty successful. I can't speak for everybody who's using a diagnostic because I don't know every instance, but in terms of my use of it, I've been very successful at kind of explaining that frame, and that they are going to have all the information they need to sort of raise all the teams, as opposed to trying to chip away at things one by one. And that usually is a fairly compelling argument why they don't get to see that stuff.
Yeah. All right. So one last question here. Once the leadership team is on board, how does that best get passed down to the people doing the work? As a consultant, I've worked with teams who aren't totally on board with this new way of working. How do we show the benefits when they aren't the ones who choose to make the sacrifices?
Right. Well, so that part of the, you know, in that kind of situation, we end up talking to the leaders, the senior leaders, middle managers, about one of the investments is in how they are going to communicate this to their teams, spending time thinking about that, making sure that the teams understand this is the direction we're heading and we need you to be on board, and this is why it's important you're on board, and making sure that they're communicating that, right? That is a form of investment. Not all of the investments have to do with, you know, buying training. It's not all monetary. Some of it is, where are you putting your attention? How are you communicating with your teams? Those kinds of things. You know, I find when, especially in organizations where there have been lots and lots of changes in the past, employees can get kind of jaded about that. And so putting together that team of people that is really going to move this forward is an important step. And, you know, investing in making sure that you're going to be communicating the whys and wherefores and the urgency of making this shift for your business and for employees to retain their jobs. Because if the company can't stay in business, the employees are out looking for other jobs, right? So getting clear about that really goes a long way toward getting people on board.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sure.
And so with that, I'm going to just very quickly share my screen one last time. And thank you all for coming today. If I'm sure people have additional questions, we've talked a lot about the Agile Fluency model, where you can go and check out the PDF, the 10-minute video, and you can also reach Diana directly at diana@agilefluency.org. You can reach me at debbie@stridenyc.com, which is up at the top here. And our last speaker is August 6th, Jeff Gothelf, who is an amazing individual, amazing speaker and writer on continuously learning our way to better outcomes. So thank you, Diana. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And everyone have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thanks, everyone.